And we are the Coalition, loud and proud, outrage porn-free, civilly disobedient media, broadcasting live on the worldwide Coalition Media Network here at the Go Local Live Broadcast Center, 98 Boston Street, in the heart of the city we love. The Naked City, the city of 1,000 stories. Tonight we'll tell 3 of them. Facebook.com/The Coalition Radio, on the mighty Twitter at Coalition_, and of course, coalitionradio.us. We're spending some time earlier today going through our old AM radio shows. We're gonna recycle through a few of them. There's some oldies and goodies, not the least of which is my favorite, one of my favorites I say of all time, when I had the opportunity to interview the Cool Moose, none other than the late great Bob Healy, who I believe provides a lesson for what government should be today. But that's another subject, and we're certainly going to highlight that. Conversations we had a few years ago about the city of Providence and its financial values and issues challenging it. I posted as part of today's promotion one of my favorite shows of all time. On a number of occasions, he's joined us, but Stephen Brown, early on in the Coalition history, spent a full hour with us discussing the history, the work, the challenges, and the, if you will, the shifting sands of love and, let's just say, emotions directed towards your Rhode Island chapter of the American Civil Liberties Union. It's a fascinating history, and for those people that would deign to think that the ACLU votes one way or another way, or is biased in favor of one organization over another organization, I would challenge you, and I would ask you to listen, if you have a few moments, to this conversation with an open ear, and particularly an open mind, because Stephen will point out to you specific history where, well, the ACLU has either been the object of love or sometimes some pretty strong feelings by everybody. My contention has always been that with a watchdog agency, if at one point or another everybody's mad at you, you're probably doing your job. So give a listen to that. Why you should join the ACLU now. A 1-hour interview from a few years ago with Stephen Brown, who's the executive director. I'd like to all the people recently who've signed on and liked our Facebook page and our Twitter feed. It's really important to us. Why? As a sort of indie media guerrilla outfit, we don't have the big bucks to advertise on the back of airplanes and with crop dusters flying underneath it, or a big bullhorn attached to your car as you drive around the lake. No, we're not the Blues Brothers. We're not even there. So when you like our page or follow us on Twitter, it gives us a chance to amplify what we're talking about. And tonight is living proof that it's all about the conversation. So many of the media efforts here in town are, well, they're left or they're right. Tonight we're going to talk about Invenergy for the first time in a while. We're going to check in with a good friend of the show. Then we're going to have an advocate for your Second Amendment rights on. And we're going to talk about, have an honest conversation about Gina Raimondo's, quote unquote, now it's officially been deigned by the national media, nickel and diming of the Rhode Island electorate. And then after that, we're going to have a representative, someone who's another, shall we say, another repeat offender here on the Coalition, Lauren Nidell. She's going to join us, and she's going to talk about the early stages of Bernie Sanders 2.0, amongst other things. You won't get that kind of diversity or intellectual honesty anywhere else in Rhode Island, I would say. We are not agenda-driven, and as always, we are outrage porn-free, civilly disobedient media. So it's a great pride and pleasure that I have someone back for the first time, really since the fall. So I wish him a happy new year. Sadly enough, I haven't seen him. That doesn't mean he's gone gently into that good night. That doesn't mean his sense of interesting mix of intelligence, warmth, and some genuine outrage has been dampened at any level. His name is Paul Roselli. We knew him as the individual who ran for state senate. We now know him, of course, as the environmental activist, professional filmmaker, man about town, and he's going to update us on what's going on with Paul Roselli and all things environmental. Paul, welcome back.
Well, thanks, Pat. Certainly thanks to you for all that you do. The Coalition Radio and TV, and certainly Pat Ford is one of those entities in Rhode Island that keeps Rhode Island honest, and I'm glad to be somewhat whatever part of whatever that is. So
you are a repeat offender.
I am one of those people who seem to show up every once in a while. So yeah, well, an update, what's going on? So I'm not quite sure. Ever since the election way back in November, was that long ago, I've decided to take a look back as to what I've done over these past 12, 15 years or so as a land trust president, as an environmentalist, lately as a political junkie, and am slowly trying to figure out what to do with the rest of my adult life. And it's a hard thing to think about because whatever I decide to do, like I've done with everything else I've done, it's going to be full time. I'm taking some time off, but that doesn't mean I've decided to just sit back and smell the roses. In the winter, it's kind of tough to find some roses to smell. So I've decided to go after the things that I'm good at and proud of. So land preservation, getting the word out about what's beautiful in Rhode Island and what needs to be changed, and also talking a lot to a lot of people about their future as well. So what do we do? What do we do in Rhode Island? I've been spending a lot of time in actively opposing the power plant, the proposed frack gas power plant, proposed for the middle of the woods in northwestern Rhode Island. That's a key issue, and we'll talk about that. So that gives you a little update. I'm out there as much as possible trying to understand what's going on in Rhode Island, what people are feeling these days. You know, I have a feeling very soon, and hopefully within this year, this Invenergy project will be over. And then what's next? What do we need? What do we need to change next? Because the Invenergy project has opened up the proverbial can of worms as to some of the inefficiencies in state government, some of the inadequacies of how we deal with these large-scale projects, some of the inequities when it comes to thinking about where these projects go, the sacrifice zones that we've created, and I hope to talk about that too. Not just the northwest corner of the state of Rhode Island, but about a mile and a half from here at Fields Point, the LNG facility, and gas infrastructure and all the fossil fuel things that need to be dealt with. These are issues that need a leader, that need an organization or an individual to step up and say, no more. We've decided to do something about this and put a concerted effort to making sure that those things are changed. So that's what I've been doing.
It strikes me that, particularly in the environmentalist community, you've got this incredible patchwork quilt of activists, many of whom are doing wonderful work. You talk about FANG, you talk about the Raging Grannies, you talk about the Audubon Society here in the state, you talk about all sorts of folks. And to the degree that they're operating, I won't say across purposes, but they're operating independently.
Sure.
And it strikes me that for them to be effective, particularly at a level where they're not, it's difficult to say, but I fear, unfortunately, that politics, the tinge of politics, has negatively impacted some of the grassroots efforts,
Sure.
which are sincerely waged on behalf of issues, not because of the folks involved in them on a day-to-day basis, but as much because of the folks who have tried to co-opt them for their own personal political
Sure.
purposes.
Sure.
And, you know, and the governor strikes me as one of them, obviously. She's the most ingenuous of the type. You know, we continue to see, you know, good Gina, evil Gina, good evil Gina, evil Gina, occasionally good Gina, lots more of evil Gina. And that's my opinion.
Sure.
But, you know, you have a lot of green mailing going on in the state.
Yeah.
And then so is there a role for a group of people, whether it be a board of directors, some oversight, or
Sure.
some organization like that
Yeah.
kind of herds the cats?
So that's a fair criticism, and I can tell you from a personal experience working with a new organization that is looking holistically throughout the state, of trying to figure out not only what are we doing, who's doing it, but how to bring all of those forces together. And there are a lot of them. And for whatever reason, whether it be for the administration in District of Columbia, whether it be our current administration, our current directors in some of the state agencies, some of these projects that are both onerous on a grand scale and just deadly on a specific scale, like a LNG tank or a power plant in the middle of the woods. So that's a fair criticism. So this one organization is trying to be that coalescing group, that group that gets all of these other organizations, not so much together, because there are some that want to be think tanks, there are some that want to be activists, there's some that want to do letter campaigns and petition writing, but also but in the end we have to, if we're going to if we're going to move ahead, we have to come together in some fashion, whether it just be reporting or common calendars or whatever it is. But I think the beauty in all of this, and I'm going to play centrist for a second. The beauty in all of this is that there are people on both sides of the equation. There are the Second Amendment folks who want the places to hunt and fish. There are the folks who are left of center, who are thinking the end of fossil fuels, but also want to power their cell phones and their electric gadgets. So I think there's a lot of room for improvement, and I also know that this is the time that we have to come together. You know, I've said this before, and I said this during the election, and I remember talking about this no matter where I go, that the only way we're going to move ahead is that we start working together, and we need state government to step up and do the things they're supposed to do. Right now, they're not. Right now, the EC4 Council, the CRMC, even DEM. DEM is not doing the type of job that they are supposed to do. Enforcing regulations, putting out regulations that help us move forward instead of backwards. Making sure that organizations that propose LNG tanks and power plants in the middle of the woods don't necessarily need to come to Rhode Island. We don't need these things anymore. Our economy has to go towards a different direction. There's no other way. There was I'll jump right into this, the Energy Facilities Siting Act, which was a piece of legislation designed to try to update something called an Energy Facility Siting Board. Those are the folks it's a three-person panel, all appointed by the governor of the state of Rhode Island, that are authorized to do siting and permitting of large-scale projects. Anything over 40 megawatts. These are big-scale projects. 40 megawatts can easily power about 10,000 homes. So you get the idea of the scale of that size. For the last 4 years, those three people on that board have been holding hearings, getting testimony, both the attorneys for the town of Burrillville, where this thing is going to go or would go, along with the Conservation Law Foundation, have been battling this out. One of the things that came out of this was that we need to look at the Energy Facility Siting Act. Why is it that we're surrounded all throughout New England by panels of 7 members, 9 members, panels that expand and contract depending on the size of the project. And here we are locked into a 1986 law that says that 3 people only, all appointed by the governor of the state of Rhode Island.
And if I can use an analogy, they are literally chief judge, they're the jury, and they are the executioner.
Well, in all fairness, that's the way the board has been set up. That's the way it was authorized way back in 1986. And let's be honest here. I mean, how many power plants have we even thought about doing in the state of Rhode Island? Maybe 2 or 3 in those last 30 years. This is the one that is causing a lot of problems. I think, and probably the others have caused problems as well. But this one in particular, because of scale and size, and also because here we are in a warmer world. There's no way around it. This is a warmer world. Our climate is changing. However you want to call it, if you want to call it severe weather, severe drought, severe thunderstorms, hurricanes, I'll give you you can fill in the blank the line, the blank in the line. You can fill in that space of what that climate change means. So what do we do with this Energy Facility Siting Board and the act that was created over 30 years ago? Well, many of us thought about 2 years ago that it needs to be changed, needs to be updated. Why can't we be like New Hampshire? Why can't we be like our neighbors to the west in Connecticut and our neighbors directly to the north and east, Massachusetts? Why can't we be like the state of Washington, which believe it or not, has a very similar population size, but they have a couple of million over there. We've got about half the size here, small rural area over there. New Hampshire, about the same size, 1.2 million up there. We're just hovering on around 1 million people here. They've got in New Hampshire, they've got an Energy Facility Siting Board that has 7 members, subcommittees, engineers, laborers, unions that are on this thing, local host community people, so that there is some direct involvement. There's also a public advocate that's appointed by the Attorney General. Why can't we be like that? What is holding us back? So some of us got together a couple of years ago and asked the House of Representatives here in the state of Rhode Island, asked the House to put together a study commission. I was on that study commission.
Right.
There were laborers and union folks there. There were town council folks. There were folks from the League of Cities and Towns, a couple of folks from ordinary citizens.
It was remarkably balanced.
I'm glad you said that, because I felt that way too. As soon as we got there and looked around the room, I thought, this isn't bad. This isn't terrible. This is actually pretty good. We've got a good representation, and not just the host community for the town of Burrillville anyway, but Providence, South County, the East Bay, the western part of Rhode Island, and some of the sectors that, both on the Tech RI side, Mr. Doug Gablinski was there, Michael Sabatoni was there from the Laborers Union. There were, like I said, representatives from League of Cities and Towns, nonprofits, land and environmentalists as well. Amy Moses from the Conservation Law Foundation was there as well. And we came up with what I thought was a good workaround, a good update to the existing Rhode Island Energy Facility Siting Act. And that proposal was put into a legislation. It was sent to the House. The House approved it, unanimous approval. Thank you, Speaker Mattiello, for pushing that through. Representative Cale Keeble, thank you for getting that through as well. In the Senate, we didn't have that much luck. It got to the committee, the Senate House Judiciary Committee, and it died in committee before the end of the session. A few months ago, and it was a few months ago, the bill was revived, and it was sent into our current, with our current legislative leaders, Jessica De La Cruz on the Senate side, and David Place on the House side. It's in the House. We had a hearing last night, and the way the bill is structured, and I said this last night, and I really did mean it. And if you go to the archives of the Rhode Island Capitol TV and you look up the hearing for the Environmental and Natural Resources Committee House on the House side, and you look up the video, what I said for opening remarks was this. This bill says to the rest of the country that Rhode Island is ready and open for business. And that's exactly what that bill says. Yep, we've expanded the board. Yep, there's a public advocate. We're even paying people, if they're not already paid because they belong to they're hired and work in a state agency or a government office or on the payroll of something else. We pay individuals. This bill will pay individuals to be on this board. So if you work a 9-to-5 job, it's tough to volunteer on a board that starts at 9 o'clock in the morning and ends at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. It's nearly impossible. So if you get assigned to that board, you're scared to death of going out of because of the income that you're going to lose. But now that's taken care of. If this bill passes, that'll be one of the provisions to get ordinary citizens in the state of Rhode Island on these boards. We've also expanded the role of the Attorney General's office, which I think is a great idea. It puts the public advocacy part directly in the hands of the Attorney General, not the governor's office, not any state aid, not the Speaker of the House or the Senate President, but the Attorney General, who designates an attorney through the Attorney General's office to act on the public benefit. Mm-hmm. The reason I said that this bill is now designed to be to tell the rest of the world that Rhode Island is ready and open for business, because it streamlines the process. It sets into motion one thing that we haven't had so far in any major energy facility, production facility, and that is this thing called a pre-conference, the conference that has before the application is made. And for investors who come to Rhode Island, you don't have to dicker with any of this stuff. You don't have to look at all these different agencies and get a piece here and a piece there. It streamlines the process. It unifies all the state agencies as to not only the process, but the emission standards. And that's very important, because as we're moving towards a warmer world and a more severe climate change world, having a unified state agency approach, knowing exactly where the emissions guidelines are. There are no ifs, ands, or buts. You come, you look at that, and if you think you qualify, mm-hmm. then you start making the and you go through the pre-conference application period. The investor saves a lot of money and time, and for any investor, and gosh, I know all about investors with the business that I work in. You know that time and money are the two major categories about whether or not they're going to invest in anything. A film, an industry, a power plant, right. Whatever it is.
And there's also, I think the third thing is certainty of process.
Correct. Correct.
Because
right.
Investors, it's interesting, when you look at, for example, bond ratings, some highly troubled cities have essentially recovered some of their bond ratings because there's a certainty in process where that municipality is moving forward in an orderly way towards, I don't know, rejuvenation, renewal. If investors come to an environment like this, where they're building, and this is as important as not only in analyzing some of these legacy style projects that have been attempted to build in the Northeast, but it's just as important in an approach to new era energy process, that That's investors right. will know that they will, if they follow a process, they will have the right level of exposure to all of the stakeholders right. simultaneously. You will eliminate the sort of noise and the chaos that has happened in so many entities across the nation, and you will avoid, hopefully, the sort of ill feelings and sometimes misconceptions and ignorance towards a project because of the hurt feelings associated with a chaotic process or sometimes an absence of process.
Correct, and that's one of the key features and the key reasons that this bill needs to get out of committee and to the House floor and the Senate floor. The other thing is, and I'm glad you mentioned this, the other thing, not only for the process, but it illustrates one other point very clearly within this law. And I want to make sure we understand this, everybody who's listening and watching understands this. This is the start of the elimination of fossil fuels for the production of electricity in the state of Rhode Island. That's what this bill does. It does not incentivize fossil fuel power plants any longer. It de-incentivizes them. It says that you have to meet emissions, not that we'll give you some exceptions or we'll give you some allowances.
Elaborate on that, because that's an important point. I mean, as someone who does not believe in incentives and believes in a truly free market, there are many situations in America where industrialization is I'll call it stealth incentivization.
Sure.
Where it happens in the background right. through archaic tax structures, for example, oil and gas partnerships, where there's special tax treatment, tax stabilization agreements, all of this stuff that's kind of in the soup and really provides an incentive, but is looked upon by the public as a free market project. They're not. So maybe if you could elaborate on that, sure. what's happened here.
Sure, you bet. So here's what the incentives do. The incentives say immediately that you have to look at these emission rates in order to look at your project and see if it's going to qualify to be built in Rhode Island. So what does that do? And let's be clear, fossil fuels can't meet the emissions rate. So what's left? All the alternatives, all the alternative energy efficiency programs, all the alternative wind power programs, all the alternative solar programs. And not only solar, and I'm not a big fan of clear-cutting forests to put solar in, but things like solar canopies, solar on rooftops, solar on landfills that have a cap surface, but also can be managed in a way to not break the cap. I get it. Parking lots, rooftops, shopping malls. We've got some of the biggest shopping malls in Rhode Island, in Warwick, and Lincoln, and Smithfield, and there are these huge parking lots. Garden City, I was in Garden City today, thinking about how a solar canopy or solar canopies would be ideal for that. I had to park and then walk about 100 feet to a shop. If it was raining or snowing, I'll tell you, I wouldn't go to Garden City. It just doesn't make any sense. I might go to Providence Place Mall instead, where I can drive inside and be under that rain or snow. But with a solar canopy, you're protected from some of the elements, and you're generating electricity. So those are some of the incentives. In other words, it pushes people, it pushes investors. And this is a market-driven, but still it's not a money incentive, but it's both a philosophical and an emissions incentive. It says very specifically, you've got to meet these emission standards in the state of Rhode Island. And like I said, most fossil fuel power plants, whatever their scale is, cannot meet them. That's why exceptions are made. That's why we're in this process for Invenergy and the Energy Facility Siting Board. 4 years into it, if by some act of some deity up there, this power plant goes through, they will have to subscribe or be given exceptions. With this new bill, there are no exceptions. It's mandatory meeting of these guidelines, and if you don't, you're out. Don't even bother applying. Don't come to Rhode Island.
Now, Mr. Kaplinsky, and I'm not going to put words in his mouth, visited the show at one point because we're fair and everybody gets a shot.
Sure.
We all know the rules of the coalition. If I like you, we invite you on the show. If we don't like you, we make fun of you. And if political leaders don't answer questions, we simply make the answers up. Very mature. So Mr. Kaplinsky came on, and how do you address the recurring? When we get to the next part of the conversation, this is what to me, the big issue facing us. Politics are so polarized at this point, particularly at the national level, so polarized that sometimes it's almost impossible to get one side or another, as there's equal responsibility on both sides, to even allow an open mind about an issue, because it is inexorably linked to the side that they loathe. If an issue somehow is connected to Hillary Clinton, there's an entire segment of the population that simply, it's like Felix on The Odd Couple, is going to do and the reverse is true. Sure. I see equal guilt on both sides. Yeah. So we'll get back to that, but how do you address to folks the overriding fear that this is going to continue to render Rhode Island to be non-competitive in terms of energy manufacturing costs, as Mr. Kaplinsky would have you believe, or that this is going to drive up energy costs even further? Sure. Because when they look at the Block Island Wind Project, and they see the rates that have been locked into place, ironically by a Republican governor, don't always assume anything.
Yeah, Governor Don Kucheri, way back when.
Right. How do you overcome those fears, or can you, or are they fears?
Sure. So let's see what has happened in the past 4 years. 4 short years. I'm wearing shoes that are 4 years old, I think. So you know that, well, actually, they're 4 years old now that I think about it. So 4 years goes by very quickly. In those 4 years, the cost of solar, in other words, the actual solar panels, has dropped precipitously. It's about 20% of what it was 4 years ago. The cost of producing electricity from solar panels has dropped as well. The cost of installation, because more people are doing it. And on, the cost of the technology and the infrastructure and the software, and software is a big deal when it comes to solar production. Heat pumps, electrical devices becoming more efficient. We have gotten to the point that we don't need this power plant. Not that we don't, well, we don't need the power, and we don't need the power plant. Just in 4 short years, this power plant would produce a gigawatt of electricity. We don't need it. So let's go to the windmills off of Block Island, which we're getting some pretty good rates for, and locked in for about 20 years. The offshore vineyard wind or the offshore wind that'll go between Block Island Sound, Long Island Sound, that area around there is coming in at a much reduced cost. Hydro looks like it's coming our way from Quebec City and the Quebec, Canada area, and that has some implications for indigenous species, indigenous people who are being flooded out of some of their indigenous lands. We have to look carefully at that, and if we want to subscribe to that and buy into that. But I think what Mr. Gablinski is challenged by is looking at the picture, looking at all of this and saying it's going to be the same in 4 years or 5 years or 20 years. It's not. It's not. Had a discussion with an individual last night about cars and how the electrification of cars would drive up the cost of lithium, and how lithium is such in terms of mining it, resourcing it, is a really incredibly land-intensive type of process to make lithium batteries. And I said, you're looking at this because you're thinking that today it's going to be the same 5, 10, 15, 20 years from now. It's not. Just the same thing 4 years ago. 4 years ago, if we said, everything's going to be the same, prices are going to be the same, market forces are going to be the same, we'll never be solar and wind will never be cost effective. Just not true. For a libertarian as yourself, you must be jumping up and down to hear that market forces have shattered the fossil fuel industry. The only reason that they're still alive is because they get a tax credit, because we give them a subsidy, because it's written into the tax laws. If that subsidy went away tomorrow, they couldn't compete. They can't compete. One of the other things I want to mention, one of the other things this bill does, it levels that playing field. It finally says to everybody out there, fossil fuels are not the way to go. They're just not the be-all and end-all when it comes to production of electricity in our state, in our region, or on our planet. There are alternatives. And when you start leveling the playing field, however you want to describe it, market forces, some philosophical emissions incentives, whatever terms you want to use. And I like market forces. I don't have any problems, because market forces have really gotten us to this point today when it comes to wind and solar. The incentives are still there, granted. Massachusetts and Charlie Baker and the Commonwealth of Massachusetts folks have really pushed it as much as possible. Thank you. Thank you to the folks from Massachusetts. We're about 10 years behind in terms of market forces, because our political structure just cannot see beyond their own brim of their own hat.
Yeah, no, that's a recurring complaint. We're 10 years behind.
It's 10 years
legalization of cannabis. We're 10 years behind how we handle really just about everything.
So I get it when it comes to how the politics shapes some of those agencies that are supposed to do things, and how it shapes our future. I get that, but if we strip away all of that for just a second and look at what has happened with both, and I can't deny incentives, because the incentives are there. We pay for them. Each individual utility bill has some of that stuff built in. It starts to level the playing field with the fossil fuel industry that has been getting incentives for at least 100 years.
Right.
And we're finally giving incentives to the solar and wind, to the alternatives. Yay. Yay, incentives. You know, there we go. Put one up there for the incentive side. That's where we need to be. And in my mind, some of the organizations that I belong to are going to take a leadership role and make sure that all these other different organizations get together and we start making sure that state government works for the benefit of not only the politicians and the state governments and some individuals, but for all the citizens of Rhode Island.
Folks, if you're just joining us, Paul Roselli is here, former candidate for state senate, one of the leaders in the anti-Invenergy gas frac power plant for northwestern Rhode Island. Also, quite the leader when it comes to the changes in the structural issues surrounding power plant improvement. And of course, that would be under the Energy Facility Siting Board and the legislation that's going forward to that. And then I would describe him as a visionary in his assessment of the needs of Rhode Island to move away from, again, let's be intellectually honest, a subsidized frac gas-based, oil, coal-based power grid, and towards a, ostensibly, as he would argue, a more modern, now as economies of scale are gained, more cost-effective way at powering our grid here in the state of Rhode Island. This hour, of course, is brought to you by the fine folks at Yacht Club Soda, yachtclubbottling.com, Rhode Island's boutique soda before we even knew we had boutique soda. All right, root beer is my favorite, birch beer. There's a big announcement on the horizon with Yacht Club. We hope to have it here live in studio in a few weeks and maybe even do a remote from the bottling works, which of course are located in the greater North Providence area. Available through distribution at McLaughlin and Moran and at fine restaurants around the state. Folks, don't settle for the refinery soda. Clear water, clean water, no fructose, using real cane sugar, natural flavors, real vanilla, real ginger. Great mixers for craft cocktails, as well as great refreshing sodas. It may not seem like it's soda weather yet, but as far as I'm concerned, it's always a great night for a cool, crisp root beer. Paul, when I talk about the politicization of power, and when I say power, I mean power production. As I mentioned a few minutes ago, we become so polarized, and there seems to be little, at least on a national level, I think the folks in Rhode Island are a little bit more open to discussion, but it would appear that one side has, in lockstep, allied itself, and the other side, now, and we're talking about right of center. In fact, because I think of some of the misinformation about incentives, but and a genuine fear of accelerating prices in a part of the country for which power is expensive relative to other parts of the nation. Yeah. And then, of course, a genuine distrust for anything associated from, in their perspective, the radical left. Look on the right-hand side, and everybody's a Koch brother loving, gas frac powered. We're going to sell you short so we get we could buy the real estate before the next big power plant comes in. How do we, now you talk about folks developing leadership roles in the energy community, if you will, or better yet, the environmental community, and trying to bridge that gap. What are some concrete steps that we can do in this state to foster honest conversation?
So I think we need to look at other models and also look to our neighbors to the east and north, Massachusetts. And I've said this a number of times, so Paul McDonald, I hope you don't mind me saying this again, but the IBEW, International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, decided a number of years ago that fossil fuel infrastructure was a type of project that had an enormous amount of regulatory angst to it, had to deal with the political fervor of that particular time, had to deal with the environmentalists, had to deal with the Conservation Law Foundation and other entities that would sue it, that would sue whatever it is, no matter what whether it's pipes in some of the inner cities, whether it's a liquefied natural gas facility along the coast in Boston, or whatever it was. So they decided to start to de-emphasize those types of projects and emphasize the projects that had a quick return. And I think that's where the common ground is. I don't have any issues with laborers, carpenters, electrical workers, plumbers, pipe fitters. I've developed over these last couple of years some good relationships with the folks at the Rhode Island Carpenters Union, the electrical, the IBEW in Rhode Island. Tried as much as possible to get to talk with the laborers and other folks to get them at least in the room and just chat, because I know there's common ground. I know there are things that we have in common because of the way they vote. And this is one of the things we talk about, and when I was on the campaign trail, we talked a lot about. In Rhode Island, we have this odd thing called bond referendums for open space. And I'm of the opinion now that we need to eliminate those bond referendums for open space and put them in the state budget where they belong. And the reason I say that is because historically, ever since John Chafee started the Green Acres program in the 1960s, Rhode Islanders have approved open space and recreational bond issues for the purchase of, or the improvement of, of open space, agricultural lands, agricultural preservation, farmlands, the things that characterize Rhode Island historically, that sense of place, that bucolic charm that we really like and enjoy here. That's what makes Rhode Island and not anywhere else in the USA. And this last election, I'm sure you looked at it, over 78% of the voters who voted to approve those open space bond referendums. 78%. As a politician, I'm looking for 51%.
Right.
I would die for a 78% approval rating. And that's where we are. So laborers, carpenters, pipe fitters, electrical workers, all the above, they're all citizens in the state of Rhode Island. They love this place as much as possible. So that's the first common ground. The second common ground is the speed at which these projects get approved. And again, I go back to the FSA legislation, the Energy Facility Siting Act legislation. That legislation will streamline the process, will make the process, as you say, more consistent between state agencies, and that's really important. And if we can get that, that means more people to work faster. That's what it means. That's exactly what it means, and that's why I said at the opening of my testimony yesterday, or last night, that this bill makes Rhode Island ready and open for business, and that's what it does. That's the second one. And then the third, I was talking with Paul McDonald yesterday. Paul, I hope you don't mind me sharing a little bit of this conversation that we had yesterday. I understand that Michael Sabatoni and Doug Gablinski and a few others, that's their job. Their job is to promote their cause, just like it's my job, although I'm a volunteer, but it's my job to go out and promote some of the things that I'm strongly in favor of. So I get that. It's their job. And I understand that their job is to promote their constituency, because if they didn't, they wouldn't have a job. They just wouldn't be in that position. So how do we overcome that? Where is the common ground? And I think the common ground is the love of our state. I really do. And I know people enjoy it, because even in northwestern Rhode Island, we get about 100,000 visitors a year coming to the state parks up there. Pulaski, George Washington Management Area, Black Hut, and some of the others. 100,000 visitors a year. Actually, last year, I know it was more. It was around 110, 112,000 people coming, because the air is clean, the water's fishable, you can still go splash around the ponds, you can camp at night, you can get some firewood, make a fire, do all the things that parents love to do with their children, tell stories, look at the stars, catch a fish, whatever it is. And that's the other common ground. And when you start talking with individuals from all the different segments, whether it be the unions, or the political, the nonprofits, the NGOs, the enviro folks, whatever they are, that's the common thread that binds us all. That needs to be talked about. That needs to be discussed more. That, and in small groups, whether it be coffee or tea or whatever it is, talk about this love of the land, because we all share that. I don't think any one of us would ever suggest that we want to demolish the arcade downtown Providence. I don't think any one of us would want to replace Slater Mill with something else. I don't think any one of us would go to South County and say that we want a city or a high rise. That's just not our character. The beaches and our inland woods are fundamental to our DNA. It's always been that way. It's written into our Constitution. Roger Williams, when he came here, said that, this is what I want. And then when the Rhode Island finally got their act together, they wrote in there about some of the love of their land. So those three areas, and yes, it is about jobs. Acts like this start to make that process speedier, faster. So we're not waiting in the 4 years that this process has gone on, millions of dollars have been spent. Not one laborer has put one shovel in the ground. Not 1 pound, 1 cubic yard of concrete has been poured. Not 1 gallon of paint has been used. Nothing, not 1 string of wire has been strung in those 4 years.
Right.
It's time to get off the fossil fuel wagon. It's now time to stop moving these projects faster according to the incentives and the regulations set forth. Once you establish that, investors will come. You can build it. You can build it and they will come. We just have to get out of the way. We have to provide the regulations and then get out of their way and they'll come. So those are the common threads. And when you talk to them, even Doug Goblinski, Doug, if you're watching, let's have a conversation because I absolutely know we can find some common ground. And to go back to something you mentioned earlier about the Energy Facilities Siting Act Study Commission, Doug was there. Mr. Goblinski was there. Mr. Sabatoni was there. There were a few other people from the labor unions and from that segment of Rhode Island were there. So they had ample input. They had ample opportunity to provide input, testimony, expert witnesses. Greg Mancini was there also from some of the unions as well. Greg and Michael and Doug and all the others had ample opportunity. The bill was constructed, and here we are today. And we need to move it through. For the better of Rhode Island, for the better of jobs in Rhode Island, this piece of legislation needs to get through.
Where does it stand legislatively right now? Now, let's do a recap.
Sure.
I know there was a lot of disappointment last year. You had extensive hearings.
Right.
That were promoted by the Speaker's office, if I'm correct.
Right.
And that led to the composition, as we point out, of a remarkably diverse group of stakeholders. Right. The bill was tabled ultimately last year for study?
It got into the House. The House passed it unanimously. So the legislation, but here's the thing that happened. And then it got into the Senate and died in committee there. But here's the thing that happened, and I hope everybody, this is one of those arcane things that you don't know the subtleties, because if you knew something about them, you understand that actually something remarkable happened. It got to the Senate. The Senate died in committee, but before it died, they made changes, went back to the House. So in the Senate and the House made some changes. It got to what's called a sub-A. Sub-A language was when both houses disagree on certain things, agree on certain things, they have to write new legislation. They did. And then it got to a sub-AA. So even that language got modified and changed in both houses again. So it's gone through the Senate twice last year. Unfortunately, the way the rules were written, the way the rules are written now, that if it's that after 2 years during an election cycle or before the election begins, if a bill makes it, last year if it dies 1 year, you have to resubmit it again. This year, I think in the Senate and the House, they've put together if during a 2-year cycle, in other words, from election to election, if the bill fails the first year, it can be reintroduced without going through the committee process again. So we are hoping that it makes it through the House. Senate, the House had one hearing last night. We suspect that there'll be some new language. There'll be a sub-A. We're hoping that the sub-A makes it to the Senate. The Senate doesn't have a hearing scheduled yet, but once it does, everyone get out there and support it. It's a good bill. It's one of those landmark bills. And Rhode Island has had some landmark bills in the previous years. This is one of those. This is one of those bills that if it passes, if it goes through, will set in stone, will set in motion the end of fossil fuels for the production of electricity, will make the process streamlined for greater investment, some of the alternatives, market-driven investment. And it will provide incentives in terms of de-incentivizing the fossil fuel use for production for electricity, will level the playing field, and will make the process itself more streamlined, and also give local, not so much control, but give local individuals an opportunity to get on the board and give local input. So that's where we are.
Is there a Senate sponsor?
As of right now, the only sponsor for both the House and the Senate side are the two individuals from that district in northwest corner of Rhode Island.
Okay. So there is work politically to be done yet, but this is the time of year when you start to beat the bushes and you start to make the sausage.
This, like you said, things you never want to see being made. One is television, the other one is sausage. But you enjoy, maybe you enjoy the results. I don't know. So yeah, we got to beat the bushes.
So we've only got a few minutes left. We have about 10 minutes left. Let's talk about Invenergy.
Yeah.
Where, for the love of God?
Yeah, where are we?
There's been yet now, as someone who does not live in Northwest Rhode Island, but who pays attention, or likes to think he does, let me give you an semi-outsider's perspective as to where we think it is. There was another set of auctions that Invenergy continued its losing streak.
Right.
There doesn't seem to be any commercial interest whatsoever in buying anything that they have to produce.
Sure.
From an outsider's perspective.
Sure.
Where does it stand? Yeah. You and I started this process 2 or 3 years ago.
That's right.
And yet, here we are.
Yeah.
Where are we?
So where are we? Talking about the auctions. So this entity called ISO New England takes care of finding or helping companies buy into the grid, or provide capacity, provide electricity for the grid. ISO New England in turn offers them a price, and the way you get into the grid is that not necessarily the auction where the highest bidder wins, but in this case the lowest bidder wins. So way back 4 years ago, the price for electricity was about $12 a kilowatt hour. Today it's around $3 or $4 a kilowatt hour. Dropped dramatically.
Well, and we'll touch on that for a second, because
it's dramatic.
Most
right?
people who end up listening to this will go, wait, what?
Yeah.
Because on one hand, we're talking about systemic power increases here.
Right.
So where's the disconnect?
Systemic power rate increases.
Prices.
So unfortunately, even though the price, because mostly the gas price has gone down, the infrastructure is starting to deteriorate. There's an enormous amount of infrastructure with substations. It could easily cost $3 to $4 million to upgrade a substation, and there are a couple of hundred substations all around Rhode Island. I think they're more than that. So don't hold me to that number.
Right, we won't put a factoid.
Yeah, don't put a factoid up for that. And we have to be cognizant that National Grid is a big organization. We've had some major storms where even though they're a big organization, they haven't been able to ramp up as fast enough to take care of some of those storms. In the northwest corner of Rhode Island, it's not uncommon, because we're in the snow belt. It's not uncommon to lose power for a day or 2 or 3 or 4 days. So So with every major storm, both hurricanes and snowstorms, and I'm not speaking for National Grid. However, looking at it from a 50,000 foot viewpoint, the cost is in personnel, trucks, the infrastructure, and the constant maintenance that comes, and nothing stays the same. Salaries don't go down, cost of materials don't go down. So while the bulk rate for electricity production has dropped dramatically, the cost for all those other things has also increased dramatically at the same time. So let's talk about where Invenergy is and what's going to happen over the next several months. Right now, they're in the Public Utilities Commission Energy Facility Siting Board is in this, what they call the final hearings. This is the time that the opposition and the supporters all get together. They bring their expert witnesses, they provide expert testimony, they talk, they question the witnesses as to the validity of their expert testimony. We've gone through so far expert testimony that has to do with need, sound, location, environmental impact. Over the next several weeks, we'll go into air emissions, water quality, physical structure, and a few other things. At this point, those three individuals are just taking it all in, asking some questions along the way, asking for more detailed information. When there seems to be a gap, and there was a gap a few months ago. The Energy Facility Siting Board, those three members, looked at everybody and said, do we have an updated Public Utilities Commission recommendation or opinion as to the need for this power plant? Do we have one? And we have to remember that their opinion, the PUC's opinion, was written about 3 years ago. Think of what has taken place in those 3 years.
Right.
Dramatic shift in some of the alternatives, solar, and particularly wind. Wind is going to outpace everything. If now that the fishermen are working directly with the wind company, those issues are going to be solved, or at least mitigated as much as possible, and that project is going to get going. That's fantastic. So over the next several months, the PUC will write their opinion. We'll offer it to the Energy Facility Siting Board. Then the attorneys will provide more expert testimony. We think, in talking with both the town's attorney and the CLF's attorney, Conservation Law Foundation's attorney, we think that 6 to 8 weeks from now, the hearings will be over. So here we are, March, April, May, so probably June 1st. And then after that, probably they'll have, according to their authority, according to the regulations, they have 6 to 8 weeks to render an opinion. But not just a verbal opinion, but a written opinion. And that's where everything really, that's where the proverbial rubber meets the road.
Right.
That's where Invenergy can either get approved with a lot of restrictions, a lot of things that they have to do. It can get denied because of those same restrictions. They don't meet this, they don't meet certain air quality requirements, they don't meet certain ground or water requirements, they don't meet the bare minimum when it comes to destruction of the environment. In other words, the site is just too precious to lose. It was way back in the 90s, and here we are 30 years later, and it's the same place.
Right.
And they want to build another power plant anyway. Yeah, I think many of you know that story. So you know, do the math. 6 to 8 weeks from now, March, April, May, maybe June, middle of June, the hearings will be over. And then June, July, August, September, October, probably September, October, we'll know what their final decision is. And then we all guess, meaning all of us who have been involved in this as intimately as we have for the past 4 years. Remember, this all started August 1st, 2015, when our governor of the state of Rhode Island at a meeting at the Providence Chamber of Commerce said, we will do everything we can to make sure you, Invenergy, is successful here in Rhode Island. That's what our governor said. And here we are almost 4 years later. So it could be October or November before the final decision is made, and then we all suspect that whoever wins or whoever loses or whoever whatever will take the decision to Rhode Island Superior Court, because that's the next step in the regulations. They are allowed to take whatever most likely the losing side, I would imagine, would take, because you don't want to take, if you won, you don't want to go to Superior Court. Hey, I want to lose.
I want to make sure. I want to make sure you really, really mean it.
That's right. Do you really mean it? You want to go to court, and if you lost, and see if you can win in the courts.
Do you think at a certain point, now remember, this is the organization that said if we're not wanted, we'll leave.
Right.
You know, I mean, we're kind of checking the tea leaves now.
Yeah.
You know, there's an old saying, how can we miss you if you won't go away?
Yeah. We're about to get into 4 years of we don't want you.
Right. And 4 years of expensive litigation, borne largely by private donors and a lot of very big-hearted townspeople.
It's cost the town in terms of dollars and cents. I heard last night 7 figures, so you can figure out what that is.
Right.
So over $1 million in these past 4 years.
At a time when there's need for schools, there's need for infrastructure, clean water, all the demands that are being placed on cities and towns everywhere. You folks have, and again, yeoman's work in terms of fundraising. You had to somehow find the resources to do this. Now, I expect we'll get a Mueller-like report from the commission.
So if you want to look at what a report looks like in the town of Oxford, Connecticut, but now it's almost 2 years now. They issued a report. It's a couple of hundred pages long, and that's what it was. It was about 100. I shouldn't say that. It's about 100 and something pages long, going through each one of the requirements in order to cite it. The application, the buildings, water quality, air emissions, groundwater, destruction of the environment, water supply. We haven't talked about water supply for this power plant. We haven't talked about that yet. But you look at that document, and you can almost substitute the power plant that was proposed at the time in Oxford, Connecticut, and looked at and just substitute that word with Invenergy, and then go through the entire list. That actually is a very good document to read if you're an Invenergy or a political junkie or a power plant junkie, like we've all been over these past 4 years.
Right.
I recommend highly that you look that up and download that and read it. It'll give you some idea of what to expect with the Energy Facility Siting Board.
Wow.
Yeah.
Go a long way.
Long way, 4 years and counting. And I have a feeling, historically anyway, with Superior Court in these types of cases, could be anywhere from they can decide to hear the case immediately, and they might, or if it gets on a calendar along with everything else. Right now the calendar suggests that it could be a year from now. So we could be into the 5th year before a final decision is made.
Wow. Babies will have been born, and families will.
Restaurants will come. Restaurants will go. Companies will start up. Will disappear. Yeah, and people will be working, and
the circle of life can continue. But right. Uncle Ronnie's will still be there. You know, still serving the best chicken in Rhode Island. Yikes! Well,
So that's where we are.
Mm-hmm.
That is precisely where we are as of the next scheduled hearings. I think are not this coming week, but the following week, and they'll get into the emissions, water quality. We'll start talking about that.
Right. And at this point, I guess my last one, you alluded to it briefly. Yeah. One of the most hotly contested issues throughout this entire odyssey, I think it officially qualifies as an odyssey now, has been the water source. What are they claiming is going
Yeah.
to be their water source
Sure.
now?
So I'll bring you up to date, which is we don't know, and I'm not sure Invenergy knows. Conservation Law Foundation, Town of Burrillville, and the Attorney General's office in the state of Rhode Island, under Peter Kilmartin, former Attorney General, took the town of Johnston to court because the town of Johnston said that in Invenergy you can have as much water as you want. There's the spigot. Just hook up a meter. It's all yours. You can truck it from Johnston to Burrillville. Have yourself a ball. Many of us looked at that and said, well, wait a minute, where is that water coming from? It's coming from the Situate Reservoir. It's coming from the Providence Water Supply Board. Many of us, including the attorney from the town of Burrillville, Michael McElroy, Conservation Law Foundation, Jerry Elmer, and Peter Kilmartin looked at all of that and said, well, wait a minute, that's not what the 1915 Providence Water Supply Board law says. It says you can use water within the municipal borders for cooking, bathing, and for washing your body, whatever. Or, I'm sorry, cooking, bathing, and I don't know, pick something else. Some more, oh, laundering, that's right, cleaning. Yeah. So you can clean your clothes, you can wash your dishes, you can wash yourself. That's it. Or you can drink it too, I guess. But that's it. You can't use it for the generation of electricity in a fossil fuel power plant. Didn't specifically say that, but it implied that.
Right.
So these three attorneys took town of Johnston to court. A Superior Court judge who was on the bench at the time and retired, Judge Silverstein, is off the bench now. However, he took the case with him and has not rendered a decision on that case. So that case is still pending. Aside from that, they did broker a deal with the city of Fall River in Fall River, Massachusetts, with not only a water supply there, but with a company in South County, Rhode Island, that transports water and gets water from anywhere. Again, it would be trucked in. And for anybody who knows the single lane roads, windy roads, slippery at times, from Johnston or anywhere up 146 and down 44 and Route 7 or Route 102 up to Wallem Lake Road or East Wallem Lake Road. You know that those are the most dangerous, treacherous roads for an automobile, a car, let alone an 8,000-gallon tanker-size pool truck that would deliver water to cool a power plant.
I think, in fact, as a matter of fact, if you get up to adjust the heat tonight at about 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning, look outside and imagine a tractor trailer driving either chemicals and or water to the picturesque hillsides of Burrillville, Mass, in Rhode Island.
Could be 1 million gallons of water a day. That's on a day like today when the ambient air temperature is pretty cool. On hotter days, because you need to cool the power plant and you need to generate steam, you're using more water. So it could be anywhere from 750,000 gallons of water a day.
A day.
A day to well over 1 million gallons of water per day.
A day.
A day. So it's in terms of getting one's head around that.
It hurts to think about.
It hurts to think about it. It does. To think about the particulates coming out of the fossil fuel, coming out of the diesel trucks that operate these the engines that push this water away or transport this water, as well as the accidents that could occur.
Statistically, almost probable.
Even the Department of Transportation said that there is a percentage, so it's not zero. You're absolutely right. It's not zero. That the chances are over a year there may be one accident, whether it's a jackknife or rollover or whatever.
Right in the heart of one of our most important watersheds.
Right.
In literally in New England.
Right. And that's absolutely and one of the last contiguous forests from Maine down to the Carolinas. We've got to remember that particular place has been designated long ago. In the 70s and 80s and 90s, and again in the the early 2000s. That particular place in northwestern Rhode Island has been designated not only a travel way for many other species besides humans, but also a part of a much larger, contiguous, the last remaining, it's called the last green valley, and that's it. This contiguous forest from Maine down to the Carolinas is the biggest contiguous forest in all of the United States, and certainly the biggest one in New England. And when we start carving it up with something that could destroy about 220 acres, a lot of us take notice. Yeah.
And everything about it, the lifestyle, the preserve itself, the water are irreplaceable.
Yeah, yeah, and I got to go back to, and I hope you don't mind, and I know we've talked about this, but this is not a not in my backyard issue. Hopefully that sense or that sentiment has disappeared long ago. This is a change in direction. You're tacking a certain way with those sails, and all of a sudden you need to move in a direction that the tack will not allow you to do. And so it's time to come about and move that rudder and whatever other sailing metaphors I can use. And it's time to make a sea change in the way we generate electricity in the state of Rhode Island. This is the time to do it.
There you go. Paul Roselli, so good to see you again.
Thank you so much.
Joining us live here on the Coalition, talking all things Boroughville. Boroughville, as we like to say at this moment, we are all Boroughville, and we are all Rhode Islanders together, which is why we need to have a brutally honest conversation about all the issues that we've touched on tonight. Thank you again for coming out. Let's not be a stranger for this long, because as we see energy, whether it be the factionalism, hopefully will start to go away. As we see energy policy being developed, I know that you're going to be deep in the heart of it. So we are grateful for you to spend your Friday evening here with us at the Coalition to kind of bring it out to us regular folks to give it sort of the exposure, the light that it so desperately needs. Folks, we're going to take a very quick break right now. Joining us in the next segment tonight, we are politically diverse. Brenda Jacob is going to be talking about last night's hearings at Halitosis Hall, i.e. the Rhode Island State House. All credit to Rudy Cheeks. We're going to be talking about your right to free association. Is that something that's taxable by your Rhode Island government? We are the Coalition, loud and proud, outrage porn free, civilly disobedient media, broadcasting live on the worldwide Coalition Media Network here at the GoLocalLive Broadcast Center, deep in the heart of the city we love, Providence, Rhode Island, the naked city, the city of 1,000 stories. We're telling 3 tonight. Listen, the snowpocalypse, the latest version of it, is headed this way sometime in the middle of the night, so there's still time. It's early evening to get out, enjoy everything that the city of Providence has to offer. Facebook.com/The Coalition Radio, on the mighty Twitter at Coalition_radio, and CoalitionRadio.us. Where over the coming weeks, we're going to grab from the archives some of our